Happy Friday, YouTube. Happy Friday, everyone. And once again, joined by regular guests, CoquiPirate
Howdy.
and Ujames1978.
Howdy ho!
Okay then. So, basically, tonight we're discussing a serial which I'd actually, watching Dalek Invasion of Earth this week, I'd forgotten how much I love it, and I'm actually revising my opinion as to which of the first two Dalek stories is better. And they are, it's apples and oranges really, because I think the Daleks, it's very distant, very mysterious, very remote, and I always imagined it being, the other side of the universe, And this, what it does, is to bring the threat, to you with full shock and awe, with all the icons, and of course because it was germ warfare originally, wasn't it? So hence all these London landmarks weren't destroyed, and obviously not so long after World War II, so this would have resonated with people, and I actually. I'm wondering, is this actually my favourite alien invasion story of all time? But I don't know where to begin saying all the things that I love about this serial. But CoquiPirate, you have literally only just watched it for the first time. What do you think?
Well, I guess, because I remember last time the Daleks came up, the Daleks are sort of a stand-in for Nazis. I think now it's much more explicit. Well, I think that goes without saying. You have this image of like these impoverished sort of prisoners in this totalitarian government that they're, forced to dig. This sort of story of, overthrowing this, I guess these overlords. I guess usually alien invasions, you don't reach that point. You usually stop the aliens before that point.
Yeah.
Not that, this is especially unique. It might be the first because it's an older story.
Well, of course, technically you don't see the Dalek invasion of Earth. What you see is the Dalek occupation of Earth.
Yeah. And so, and you kind of see, well, obviously the Cybermen didn't exist, but it's almost sort of like a merging of the concepts, or perhaps like a proto-Cybermen concept of turning people into robots to, get the whole thing going. Their ideology is certainly different from New Who, but I guess that goes without saying. Yeah, the Earth is the best vehicle. I'm glad the Daleks understood this. We had a conversation about that not too long ago, but yeah.
Okay. And how would you say that this ranks as a serial? Because I'd say so far it's this and the Aztecs. If I were going to go this is my favourite of this season at least.
I don't think I valued it as much. I mean, I don't know. I guess it. Maybe I'm just having a harder time paying attention to this kind of stuff, but it's something that I don't know. I guess it's not like Marco Polo or the Aztecs, where I really was sort of like enamored with the characters' personalities and sort of the politics.
Okay.
Here was a very sort of black and white. We're the Anne Franks, though there were traitor humans, which was a nice little development. But they had just appeared, and then they turned them in. So yeah, I guess the story was interesting enough. I guess I just didn't really like the characters that much, and even the regulars. Susan was, in maximum whiny mode, and it just seemed like
What are you going to do now? Because you're not going to be able to complain about Susan anymore.
Good riddance. So this was probably the best possible sort of ending for her. That you're satisfied because you know that she's going to set roots and be happy or whatever. This doctor never comes back for her, does she?
I don't want to give spoilers either way. It's not quite cut and dry.
Okay, cool.
But character-wise, you've got the traitor humans, you've got the black marketeer, Ashton, who just has no redeeming features. He's just what are you? Well, some Brotherhood of Man kind of person. You've got Dortmund sacrificing himself. You've got Jenny's a great character. Just this very tough, hard-bitten, very world-weary for still quite a young woman. And some of the best. I love how she has that line, one of the last lines, over. She expresses it in one word, over. Because that's something, I think these characters are very realistic, and you feel the grit of everything. You feel, this is a story about people pulling through the hard times. James, your thoughts on this serial?
I agree with everything that you say, Alex. The problem is that this, at the end of the day, is a Nazi occupation story.
Yeah.
This is Terry Nation's science fiction reimagining of what it would be like if the Nazis had invaded, occupied most of Britain after killing most of the population. What if Hitler had germ warfare, or some means of poisoning the water supply, or what have you, whilst giving his own troops the antidote that would have allowed him to conquer and occupy most of Europe with minimal resistance. Therefore, the biggest overarching problem is, why the fuck would the Daleks want to invade this spinning ball of mud in the first place? What could they possibly gain? They want to hollow out the Earth and use it as a giant planet-sized spaceship. Go and fuck yourself in the face with a book of absurdities. Jesus fucking Christ. The revelation, why, even when I was first watching, even when I was, they made a movie of it as well, which I saw as a child. And yeah, I could see, okay, this is the Nazi occupation of Britain. But, yes, as you say, as a Nazi occupation film, it works. But as science fiction, that is the thing that, as you say, all of the great characters, all of the great issues which are explored, always the question is, why have the Daleks invaded? What do they want? What? This is the only planet in the entire fucking universe that you could use as an oversized spaceship.
In my mind, I justified it with saying, well, it's probably the largest source of geothermal power. I mean, yeah, there's Europa, but
that's the point. They're hollowing it out and replacing it with their own power sources.
You'd want a population that you could enslave that are intelligent enough and malleable enough.
For what purpose? For what point?
We're
going to use the Earth as a giant spacecraft. Why? You've already had the technology to come to Earth, to asteroid bomb and germ warfare most of its population. Oh, that's another point, though. Yes, remember, Cokie, I mentioned quite a few podcasts ago that Doctor Who is the only science fiction universe in which there is a justifiable explanation for why we never see any non-white people after the 21st century.
Oh, they all got wiped out.
Yes, Africa, South America, Asia.
Wait, no, she mentioned Actually, she used the term Red Indians to refer to like some kind of resistance that's going on.
She's a history teacher. She was pulling that out.
Yeah, she just made a whole bunch of stuff up. But considering that the Daleks believed her, would imply that they were Native Americans alive at the time.
Oh, that's a good point.
That's reading way too much into what it was effectively a piss take. But
okay. I'll send something out there. I love the pace of this. This story keeps the characters moving. Actually, you did touch, Cokie, upon the main character, the regular characters in this one. You complained about Susan. This is your last chance to do so. But this story separates the characters. And I like the way that everybody, even Susan, all the regular characters, becomes a kind of action hero in this one. Isn't that great?
I kind of like that Barbara was doing something more like her escape attempt. I don't know why I'm just immediately thinking about those collar sort of cuffs now, because the Doctor only removes hers, but who was the girl with her again? What's her name again?
Jenny.
Jenny was somehow freed on her own. It was nice. They had each of the main characters had their own story. The Doctor was on his own, Ian was on his own, Barbara was on her own, and Susan was on her own, with all of these new characters, which was a nice touch. I guess I don't have a whole lot to say on that.
Oh, okay. Well, James, how did you feel the regular characters were used or developed in this one?
I absolutely adored it. As Cokie points out, each character splitting off and being the driving force of that part of the story, or not just tagging along. Of course, Ian, being trapped on the Dalek saucer, because of course all aliens fly saucers, so why the fuck do they need a planet? Yes, Barbara as well. It has been a while since I saw the serial, so I can't remember exactly what the Doctor and Susan were doing. I hang my head in shame at the details of their stories. But yes, again, this is a Nazi Terry Nation. Again, he created the Daleks as a sci-fi reimagining of the Nazis. So the thing that makes this so spectacular is that it is essentially a Nazi occupation story. But again, its greatest strength is its greatest weakness. Without a real science fiction premise behind it, the Daleks are still the Daleks, but you have to remember what they were, at least in Terry Nation's mind originally.
Again, of course, it would have resonated so much at the time, with people still rebuilding Europe, still on ration books. And again, though, my point was, compare and contrast it. The word Dalek actually has a meaning in Serbo-Croat. It means a far and distant thing. Whether that was deliberate on Terry Nation's part.
Oh yes.
Nobody could be sure, but obviously the original story was so remote, so distant, and you didn't know when it happened. And this one, it's so kind of... And of course, a lot more people would have seen it, because word would have got around. Dalek Mania has had a year to strike, and you name a product, you can buy it with a Dalek on it. So people really remember this. But the image, which is so often recreated for Radio Times covers, the iconic Dalek image is Daleks going over Westminster Bridge. This is the shock and awe. This is what says an invasionary force is here. And it's maybe the first... Oh, and I think it's the first time they've actually had proper location shooting in Doctor Who, which of course means that a lot of it's on film, because they didn't have video cameras that could go out. So this is in every sense big and massive and epic, and And actually, you mentioned the movie version. A few years ago, in my home neighbourhood, they did a big screen outdoors screening. If you imagine a hot summer's day, a beer, you're on the grass watching it on the big screen. I kind of wish it had been the movie version because it's superior. It's also, pardon me, longer. But it's a story that 50 years on loses nothing, at least not for the British audience it was originally aimed at, including kids now. That there is just something. In fact, I recently watched the reaction video of this story, where a new series fan who's only got this far at the point of recording looks at all the twists, all the turns. Although, admittedly, of course, the funny thing about this serial is that there are things people associate with Doctor Who because of the new series. There's the first kiss, and there's the first teary goodbye. So you've got basically the first fan feels.
This actually reminded me a lot of when Amy and Rory had to, part ways with the Doctor on that, Angels Take Manhattan episode.
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess the whole, well, in this case, it was the Doctor that was a bit more reluctant to let go. So, I suppose in New Who, the Doctor took the role of Susan, and, Amy and Rory were taking the role of the Doctor. But, yeah, I think that was a good way to, wrap it up, give her, a happily ever after, even though, it's pretty much an England that's been completely war-torn. The idea of rebuilding and setting roots.
Yeah. Well, that whole thing was also beautifully seeded. On my second viewing this week, they go straight from, just in episode 1, they go straight from Susan's talking about how, things have to change the same, don't they? Can't change. The very next shot is David Campbell doing his ninja thing in the warehouse. And then there's all this talk about, there's brief mention of her helping rebuild, which she clearly wanted to do. And oh my god, OMG, the companion just totally kissed someone. And then actually James said how obvious he thought that ending was.
They could not have telegraphed it more blatantly.
Well, yeah, it was like the whole, I don't want to leave Grandpa. We'll come back for him, but we have to go right now. Yeah, there was some pretty blatant foreshadowing.
Yes. But, again, sorry, going back to what you were saying about how it loses nothing, it's the greatest story of all time, it was made for a 1960s audience. I think perhaps the Dalek Invasion of Earth is the perfect example of what I've been talking about throughout these podcasts, how each Doctor Who was made for a specific era. It was a product of the time which... it was a product of the time and the mindset in which it was created. So, yes, what you were saying, what we always say about the Daleks, it's Terry Nation originally envisaged them as alien Nazis from space, the far and distant enemy. And yes, so this is a Nazi occupation movie. Even children growing up after the war, the collective memory was still so fresh. The fear was still so was still so palpable, especially with the threat of nuclear war. Again, the original Dalek story happening just a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis. That would have all been there. So what I was saying before about how it's a great Nazi occupation story, but the science fiction aspect falls flat, that was not just the idle nitpicking of a pretentious snob. I do genuinely believe, as a writer myself, the greatest stories should speak should reflect and speak to all peoples, all ages, all eras, without relying on one particular event or one particular aspect of history for its basis. This is why things like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells are still relevant and the basis of much of modern science fiction, the grandfathers of modern science fiction, more than a century later. Because this is why the original Star Trek and the original Doctor Who are still relevant, still asking the same questions, still resonating with people half a century later. But then you take this story, which again, absolutely flawless Nazi occupation story, but it's not historical because it's an alternate future. It's an alternate history to to use the best possible term, and it's not science fiction either because the Daleks, the fact that they have alien technology and so forth is irrelevant. They are Nazis. So, again, taking nothing away from it as a story, this will be a problem that not just I, a lot of people in the 21st century will have. Especially, we grew up, Alex, at the end of the Cold War. Yeah. We still have some of the we still have memories of some of the fear of total global annihilation, etc. But today the threat is terrorism. And Coqui, you were mentioning how modern Daleks are nothing like the original Daleks. Yes, that's the issue. They were made for a specific time, a specific place. They were made to represent a specific fear. But so now the Daleks are just the evil villains who are evil because they're evil, and they're the thing that the Doctor fights and defeats every fucking time. And, play it again, Sam. Same old song, broken record.
I do like the Daleks in this serial much better than I did like them in the previous one. They were much scarier, much more sort of imposing. The idea that they can turn people into robots, that was a sort of scary thing for them to do. Until the end, where they order the Robomen to rebel against the Dalek, and then they're just sort of like, you can't even tell if it's a rebellion or a party. They're carrying the Daleks up in the air, and they're like, yeah, they're running out. And I don't know. It's kind of funny that they were shown as so imposing, and then they were just so easily overthrown.
That I do believe that was actually a deliberate point made by both Terry Nation and the director. The great tyrants who we fear, who we believe are invincible, are just as weak, just as vulnerable as any individual slave or servant. To quote the very first serial, Tribe of Gum, Cal is not stronger than the whole tribe.
Aha. And as we discussed before, oppression, dictatorship, tyranny, they require some tacit consent. Okay, well, I'm going to go around. Coqui, what would you say is your favourite aspect or moment and your least favourite aspect or moment?
My favourite aspect was, I think, the very end, Susan's parting. Also, I could really emphasize with the sort of need for direction. She felt like she was aimlessly wandering. My least favourite part, I guess, when they were, actually the beginning, that just because the TARDIS got blocked, and it was just like, oh yes, of course they can't just go back in. I don't know.
That's the premise of every single serial. Why don't they just leave? Because insert reason here.
So that it's kind of like not this poop again. And it was such a blatant setup, and I guess it's just that it seemed a little transparent for me, so I couldn't really get into it. So yeah, I love the ending. I hated the beginning.
Oh, okay. Well, that was Susan being a very silly girl and needing a jolly good smack bottom, as the Doctor said. Okay, so we have CoquiPirates. And I would say actually there's a whole thing there with the Susan character. Is she a girl or is she a woman? Because they play. I mean, she's introduced as the unearthly child. She's treated very much like a child. Some people do have a bit of a problem, which I think maybe we can come on to later. With some people have complained about this serial having a very patriarchal attitude, and they have a problem with. But I think maybe we can. I want to end on thoughts to do specifically with Susan departing and the implications of that. So for the moment, what I'm going to do is hand it over to you, James, for your favourite and least favourite moments or elements.
Yes, again, to pick out favourites is very difficult. The rebel leader in the wheelchair who organised the doomed attack on the Daleks, was then left alone. I can make the bombs work. And who's going to throw them for you? Me, just one man alone. But then, in the end, his sacrifice, for lack of a better term, what was his true motivation? Was it survivors' guilt, having sent so many men to their deaths, or worse, their enslavement as robo-men? What was it just finally to prove that he was right? Probably a mixture of the two. And also, was it to distract them long enough so that Jenny and Barbara could escape? Actually, yes, thinking back on that, there were so many other points that I loved. As particularly Ian, especially meeting the Black Marketeer. Again, this idea of, oh yes, if Britain was invaded, we'd all band together and brotherhood of man. Are you fucking kidding me? And least favourite, again, as I say, the total lack of a true science fiction element to it. If this had perhaps been a precursor to the Daleks wanting to create Cybermen as a slave race, it could have worked. But as it is, it was just a good Nazi occupation story with sci-fi elements.
So we have Dortmund's sacrifice and the encounter with Ashton. I think they're great characters. I mean, the Dortmund thing, what always gets me is, they go, and a lot of people talk about this is another important thing about classic Who, there is death in it. The death toll in this thing. You go straight from Dortmund's, did they really do that? Did they really kill off that character? What? To a kind of joke moment, where the Dalek addresses a headless shop mannequin. And there's something about that, the Dalek not knowing the difference between an inanimate humanoid thing that doesn't even have a head and an actual human being. It's both funny and very chilling at the same time. Ashton, I love because he has no redeeming features at all. And the fact that you pretty much, in the first few seconds of meeting Ashton, you know he's going to get his comeuppance, which is probably the only reason Slither exists.
Yes. Again, I would say then that Dortmund was... Again, whilst I love Ashton as as a character, it was just so obvious. The only possible reason you exist is to get killed. Excuse me, Terry Nation, I'm sorry, but the war has been over for almost 2 decades at this point. You don't really have to include pro-British anti-occupation propaganda. See, this black mark. It's like an old propaganda reel from World War II. See, this black marketeer thought that he could profit from the suffering of his fellow citizens, but now he gets his comeuppance.
Watch out, the Slither will get you.
Exactly.
I said, people never believe me when I say that I like the Slither. They think I'm joking, or that I like the Slither in an ironic way. I actually do like the Slither. But yeah. So,
as an enemy, it wasn't very intimidating. Is it going to jump? I think it's going to try to, and then just punch it off. Oh.
Well, it takes a rock on the head.
Right.
What you were saying before, though, about the Daleks not being able to recognise the difference between a human and an inanimate object, pointing to their own total lack of humanity. That, again, a comical moment, but one of those instances where comedy reveals the truth.
Yeah.
The underlying, comedy is based in that, is rooted in that same kind of subconscious area where interaction and empathy are supposed to reside. So in this case, we are laughing at the Daleks' total absence of empathy. But at the same time, their total absence of empathy, their total absence of theory of mind, ability to perceive a human being as a human being or not, is what makes them such a terrifying threat. The fact that to them we are just puppets to be used and discarded when we no longer serve a purpose. But yes, there was another point I just want to raise this. We were talking about a top 5 greatest serials of the Hartnell era. Obviously, he was only looking at the complete serials because he completely ignored things such as Marco Polo and other greats, which I believe should have been on the list. Your complaint, Alex, was that he put the chase before he put the chase at number 1 ahead of the Aztecs and ahead of Dalek Invasion of Earth. What? What the fuck is wrong with you? What? To which the point you made, well, the chase, not wanting to give any spoilers for Coqui, also written by Terry Nation, but in a rush, as a quick replacement, was a comical romp. There were comedy moments, etc. There was light relief to break up the drama of the pursuit, whereas the Dalek let's just say it. They use the term invasion in the title because it sounds better, because it sounds scarier. But no, it is the Dalek occupation of Earth. Yes. Terry Nation and the BBC pulling a bit of a Moffat there, just twisting it just enough to get a few more viewers.
People love invasions. People love saucers.
Exactly.
People,
yes. The point was, the chase having comic relief, light relief, something to break up the constant stress of the chase, versus the Dalek occupation of Earth, which, as you pointed out, is so dark, so gritty, is such an exploration of, hey, what if Britain was invaded tomorrow? How would we react? Some of us would be heroes, some of us would be traitors, most of us would be dead, etc. Why the hell would anyone put the chase before the Dalek occupation of Earth? Well, because it's 2014, and probably this guy's was weaned on Doctor Who through Russell T Davies and Moffat. And what can we say about New Who? What the point have you made, Alex? There is so much death. There is so much exploration of the darkest recesses of the human soul. What there isn't, except for the episodes like The Chase, serials like The Chase and The Romans, is bullshit comic relief thrown in for absolutely no sodding reason at the worst possible time. Yes, again, Teresa and I were talking about this recently. Comedy and tragedy together can create art if you time it properly. But if you're just throwing in comic relief, as so many modern science fiction series and what have you do, to try and trying to prevent it from becoming too heavy, to lighten it up. So no, don't worry. You don't have to think or feel too much. Then what's the sodding point? Why even trying to move us to tears if you're just going to have a comic relief moment at the end? And yes, that is one thing which Terry Nation and the other original writers, Robert Holmes, the other original writers of Doctor Who, had in spades. But it's just another example of how the Dalek Invasion of Earth won't be the greatest. Was a product of its time, and won't be regarded as highly as time continues, as the generations pass.
Okay, well, I want to throw in some interesting facts which might, because I think which may have fueled Hartnell's performance in this, which is, I only discovered this quite recently, is that it was during the shooting of this serial. First of all, he had an accident because the actors playing the Rovermen were supposed to break step going down the ramp like soldiers crossing a bridge. You know, you don't do it in unison. And they didn't obey that instruction. So when the Roverman was carrying the Doctor down the ramp, it collapsed. And William Hartnell was actually temporarily paralysed and had to take a week off, which is why he's written out of certain scenes in the middle. Some people think, where does the Doctor go in this story? But another thing which occurred during the shooting of this serial is that his Aunt Bess, who raised him, died, which obviously he must have been pretty ancient, but nonetheless, no one was being bereaved. And I wonder if that kind of fuels the emotion of a pretty powerful ending for this serial, which I want to kind of come to as the kind of final topic, because this is quite major, that it's about as emotional as Doctor Who has got with regard to its main characters by this point. It's the first ever departure of a companion, and I dare say Coqui wasn't expecting it, or at least not before the serial. As you say, there are hints. And obviously, when I look back at Susan, I think the consensus actually is that she was a somewhat wasted companion. Carole Ann Ford, we now know, was frustrated. She did leave because the Susan character wasn't what she had thought she was going to be. Although I look back upon this very fondly, I suppose I have a number of questions which I'm going to try and put into one big ball of wibbly wobbly questiony stuff, which is the sort of reflections on the Susan era, which is now over? Was she a wasted character? Will we miss her? How will the group dynamic? Well, Coqui, who hasn't seen anything after this serial yet, how does he think that the group dynamic will change? It's the first time the TARDIS crew has changed since the beginning. So, Coqui, see if you can take that ball of wibbly wobbly and run with it.
Okay. Well, in terms of the departure, I feel like that was some of the better acting, and it had sort of that circle of life kind of message to it. So, in terms of Susan as a character, I do feel she was a bit wasted. She had some moments, but I feel like there was a lot of squandered potential. I expect the future companion. I guess they could conceivably be worse, but I like to think that they're likely to get better just by virtue of the fact that it's not going to be Susan. Not that I didn't like her as a companion at all. So I'm looking forward to the next one. As for the dynamic, I'm not sure because Ian and Barbara came in specifically, because they want to know where Susan lived and that kind of thing. Kind of weird that she'd be the first to go when Ian and Barbara, who were basically just sort of kidnapped, I guess. They're stuck with the Doctor a bit longer. But yeah.
I think it's kind of sweet and kind of heartbreaking the way it's done. So you can't come in, Susan. I've locked the door. And then that speech. And I think the reason it resonates so much is that they are people who fled their own kind. They only had each other. Susan's not known another life. And the Doctor, in his very early to mid-60s patriarchal attitudes kind of way, has been, doing his duty, his responsibility. And you really see in this serial how close the characters are. You're really buying into it, that these characters have only had each other for so long. It's one of the most moving departures in Doctor Who history. And Ian and Barbara, it's weird, because by this point, assuming it's real time, more or less, they've been on the TARDIS a year. I'd have started just thinking of the TARDIS as my home, and not even expected the Doctor to get it right. It's like, he's not going to get us home. Let's just call the TARDIS home and give up hope, because we're having a good time, really. So, you, James, your thoughts on the whole Susan departure, etc.?
First of all, Alex, addressing what you said at the very end there, Ian and Barbara, they should just accept that the TARDIS is their home now. They might accept it, but home is always home. There's one book I'm reading at the moment, And the Mountains Echoed. It's a story that takes place over 6 decades. It starts with a very, very, very young girl born in Afghanistan being taken to France by a woman who she believes is her mother. And living in France, growing up in France, going in her 70s in France, always feeling that she's lost something, that something is missing in her life. To which finally, in her 60s or her 70s, she finally learns something, learns an important secret, learns that yes, her mother was who she called her mother wasn't actually her mother. Goes back to Afghanistan. I still haven't finished the book yet, so I don't know the resolution of the main plot. But there is this beautiful little scene. She's going back to the house where she grew up, which now has been racked by decades of war, and is now in Kabul, and is now being rented out to aid workers, employees of the World Food Programme, other international visitors who need a place to stay whilst they're working to help rebuild Afghanistan. But in the bedroom where she spent a few years of her life before her mother, in inverted commas, took her to France, she finds the little cupboard that her dad had painted for her. And it still has little giraffes and long-tailed monkeys. And she cries so much. That is perhaps the most powerful, the most beautiful scene. So, to bring that back to Ian and Barbara, home is all, you're in the TARDIS. Oh, yes, let's just accept it now. They might consciously not think about England anymore, not think about going back home anymore, but home will always be there on an emotional and subconscious level. Even if they do never go back. No spoilers, Cokie. It'll always be a part of who they are. But yes, I apologise for that long tangent. It's just what you said about, oh no, we're in the TARDIS. Just because you fantasise about the TARDIS, Alex, and never ever coming back for any reason, no, it doesn't mean that that's the case. But Susan and the whole wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey question which you asked, we focus so much on Susan's failures and limitations, her missed opportunities as a companion. We ignore the fact that she was a trailblazer, that she was the pioneer. She was the first young female companion. She was essentially the Uhura of Doctor Who. Because in Star Trek, what was Lieutenant Uhura? She was the ship's secretary. She answered the phone. That's all she did. But her mere existence as a black female officer on the bridge of a ship, for the fact that it's a starship is neither here nor there, was a major breakthrough for the 1960s, America in the 1960s. Kirk and Uhura's kiss, the first interracial kiss on television. But in a similar sort of vein, even to this day, teenagers who are 15, 16, 17 are still in many ways regarded as children. Nowhere near as much as they were 50 years ago, but she's a young woman and you're treating her like a 5-year-old. Yes, because she's still a child. No, she isn't. This is, of course, an issue which I am, which is a particular bugbear of mine, the fact that we have to start respecting the independence of adolescence. So yes, in that respect, the ending is spectacular. The Doctor finally coming to the realisation that no, you're not a child, you're a woman, and you deserve to have your own life.
It slightly resonates with Les Miserables for me.
Yeah. So
Jean Valjean giving up Cosette.
Yeah. And that's the thing, treating children, calling them children so you can hang on to them longer. They're not yours. This whole idea of children, in inverted commas, as property, no matter how old they may be.
Yeah.
But yes, moving on though. There was something else to say. Cokie won't have any kind of point to make in this regard because he hasn't seen other Doctor Who goodbyes, except, of course, for the new era. But I do feel that the same way that you feel about Amy and Rory, Alex, that it wasn't a goodbye necessarily, because their story was completed. That is ultimately the way that I feel about Susan. There are other departures which have so much more impact, again, no spoilers, precisely because they are so sudden, precisely because there is far less resolution. They could not have foreshadowed Susan's departure any more readily unless she'd actually come out and said it. Actually, I think she did at one point. Without the conversation of "stay here with me." I would, but my grandfather.
Yeah, I suppose it's one interesting thought that occurs. It's a throwaway line. Is of course that if they'd decided on regeneration already, they might have said, "Oh, hang on, we can regenerate Susan." But no, they wrote her out of the show, and I would say, obviously, the thing is, although of course I'm a child of the '80s. I grew up with Classic Who on VHS as well, so I wasn't I think I might have been about 11 or something when I saw this on VHS, and had got very attached to the first Doctor, Ian and Barbara and Susan setup, for want of a better term. So although I don't think I cried, I've seen people cry over that scene, although I don't think I cried, I definitely had a very very desolate feeling. It's sort of like, it was a bit kind of, don't talk to me for a while. It was very kind of...
That is one thing that I don't necessarily dislike, but one aspect of Doctor Who overall which does get my goat, which does rub me up the wrong way. I think it's been shared on... it's a meme that's been shared on Facebook a couple of times. This Doctor is the Doctor, and for anyone else to play that role is sacrilege. The show is ruined forever. Or, this companion is the companion, and for anyone else to take their place will ruin the show forever. To which 6 months later, everyone's accepted the new...
Oh yes, that's definitely how it is. Yes, I've shared things like that.
Yeah, it's that's the thing. As great as any individual companion may be, the whole basis formula of Doctor Who is that sooner or later they have to leave. Yes, they each have their own story arc, which is either concluded or brought to a terrifying halt. Or a heartbreaking halt. And again, the same thing with the Doctor himself. As the eras pass, so too does he change. To fit the new era, regenerating every few years. As much as I adore Tom Baker and Stephen, for example, would you want them? Would you still want the two of them, Peter Purvis in his 60s, 70s, and Tom Baker in his 80s, to still be the cast of the series?
Simultaneously.
Jamie.
Sorry, Cookie?
Like simultaneously, or would they do reverse regeneration?
Oh, sorry. Those were two later, one later companion and one later Doctor. Tom Baker is still over a decade away. Stephen is closer.
Yes.
But the general point being, if you can't have the same actors playing the same roles, because the sheer length of the series, it's not just a matter of logistics. In terms of story, the characters have to cycle through. They have to each
It would have been nice to have more classic series actors in the actual special. They could have had William Russell, who played Ian, is still able. He's still, but that's a big complaint among a lot of serious Doctor Who fans. There are people, Coqui, who call the 50th anniversary special the 8th anniversary. Actually, someone did that last night because we were in a podcast, and I wondered, will Coqui get that? They actually call it the 8th anniversary. They don't think it paid enough. Tom Baker is the classic series Doctor at the very end. Do you remember the curator?
Yeah, I remember. It was unclear what his relation was to the Doctor, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big wibbly thing. I'm just going to open up the floor if anybody wants to add anything else at all.
I'll probably remember after we've finished the podcast.
Before I go to find... Yeah.
Oh, no, Susan at the beginning said radiation nil. I'm like, what planet is this? But yeah.
Yes. But when Earth is normal, it has no radiation of any kind at all. Yes. Well, okay. Maybe so an example of the science fiction where they were a bit better with the fiction than they were with the science, I suppose. Basically, I mean, I'll put it this way. I get a warm glow after I watch this. I would take this serial home to meet my mother. Coqui, would you take this serial home to meet your mother?
Maybe. I did not have that particular inclination, but yeah.
I
know it's a very strange way of phrasing it, but James?
It's a troubled serial. I'm not quite sure. Marco, other serials may not have the same impacts, but the same visual presence, the same emotional presence, but they're much more stable. So in terms of there is much more consistency to them. So, again, the whole science fiction versus a great Nazi occupation story point that I've been making throughout this.
So, yeah, it's Marco Polo that you really want to get married to, but the Dalek Invasion of Earth could maybe be a rebound thing.
Yes, once the marriage has ended badly and I'm just looking for some emotional comfort, the Dalek Invasion of Earth will be there for a brief twist, a brief tryst, should I say, before I finally settle down with the Aztecs. Still longing for the halcyon days of Marco Polo, but still.
Well, on that bombshell, CoquiPirate, your final thoughts and goodbye.
No, interesting sort of take on the Dalek. You can sort of see them becoming, I guess, what I see as more familiar to how the concept is developing. And may the hamster at the Earth's core that keeps the Earth rotating rest upon your head, but only briefly.
Yes, that's what the Daleks were really after, you see, James. It's the hamster in its wheel at the centre of the Earth, keeping the Earth rotating. Yeah. And James, your final thoughts and goodbye.
Yes. This is a lesson for myself as it is for anyone who is listening, as much as it is for anyone who is listening. We are, in our smugness in the 21st century, we are so eager, so motivated to point out everything that's wrong with something from 50 years ago, that we don't look at what is right. We don't look at, for example, as I say, the fact that Susan blazed the trail, that she was the first young female companion, setting the benchmark, creating the opportunities for all young female companions that would come after her. And yes, may the great holy donkey bless your science fiction, ensuring that it does have a coherent and plausible science fiction premise, that it's not just a reimagining of history.
Well, I have two sentiments to correct. One would be, Susan, we hardly knew ye.
Yeah.
And from my point of view, certainly you will be missed. And, well, I've got nothing else to say apart from one day I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back. Until then, there must be no tears, no regrets, no anxieties. Just go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me that I am not mistaken in mine. Next episode, The Rescue.